Have the agenda. Any changes, suggestions, or could we approve the agenda?
I move we approve the agenda.
Second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Good. So we have two sets of minutes, and I will go ahead and do the Board of Health minutes, and then I'll let you. Great. Good. So the minutes from the last meeting are also attached. I know everybody read it, and it had all the comments from the people that came to testify. So I take a motion to approve the Board of Health minutes.
My second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. The Substance Abuse Advisory Commission minutes, you want to take a look at them? Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Second? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
So we've got several EIP guests here today, and I want to thank everybody for coming. The intent of this meeting was for us to get a little bit better understanding about the amendment and the implications of the amendment in terms of law enforcement and what the different law enforcement entities, be it the city, the county, the state, what would happen under the new amendment as it's written. And also, we didn't really have a clear understanding that are sort of more legal questions. And so we wanted to hear what you all had to say. And what I thought we would do is maybe let everybody introduce themselves. And then if you have a few comments, you know, in terms of ordinance, and I know Stephanie had sent out some questions that we had written up, and I don't think everybody gets those. Maybe, maybe not. So in terms of the positives or the negatives, or what you think are the problems or the good points about this amendment, in terms of the way you see it from your own perspective, let us know that. But then I think after we're done with that and introducing any comments each of you might have, more of just sort of a panel discussion with both the Substance Abuse Advisory Commission and the Board of Health, because I know we have lots of questions about it too, just so that we could interact, get a better understanding for this to help us make our recommendation to the City Council. As you probably know, this was brought up at a council meeting. It was moving forward to a vote, and then it was decided that perhaps further information should be obtained both through the Board of Health and the Substance Abuse Advisory Commission. So with that, I guess we'll start maybe with Jack.
Okay, Jack Luttrell, I'm the Chief of Police at the University of Missouri.
Tom Redden, I'm the Chief Deputy of the County Sheriff's Department.
Ken Burton, Chief of Police of the City of Columbia, and my initial thoughts are that this is, it can't be done. I don't think the council has the authority to pass an ordinance that is in violation of state and federal law. So I think we're kind of spinning our wheels here. I've made suggestions to proponents that want to legalize marijuana. They're starting in the wrong place. They either in Washington, D.C. or Jefferson City, Missouri. And that's just my personal opinion. And it would be unenforceable as it's written. Officers have discretion to make arrests when they encounter people that are violating the law. And what I would advise Columbia police officers to do is if they had somebody with 6 marijuana plants, that's a distribution amount of marijuana, and it's a current violation of state and federal law. And they are bound by the oath they took to enforce the laws, and that's what we want.
Okay.
Nancy Thompson, City Councilor.
And you did not write the ordinance. This didn't come from your office.
No, the ordinance came from Dan Vietz, who drafted the ordinance. So he'll have to speak to the specifics of the ordinance.
And he spoke at the last meeting.
Okay.
Steve Ritchie, I'm the City Prosecutor.
Greg Mermelstein, I'm the Division Director for the Public Defender. I must say in appearing here tonight that the Public Defender does not take positions on any issues of this type of thing. I'm able to provide information and I'm able to appear here in a personal capacity, but I am not representing the views of the Public Defender system. I would disagree a little bit with the police chief when he says that this is an attempt to legalize marijuana. What this ordinance appears to be doing, and I state this in a legal sense, it appears to be creating a different forum in which to prosecute marijuana offenses. And it's very important. It is not making cultivation of marijuana legal in Columbia. I think that needs to be very clear. This debate isn't about that. It's a debate about where the offense should best be prosecuted for a small group of first-time offenders. And what the ordinance appears to be doing is it appears to be directing law enforcement to refer those cases to the city prosecutor's office rather than the state court, so that the offenses can be prosecuted in the city court system rather than in the state court system. That's very important from the perspective of the clients that I see, because what I see is when you get prosecuted in city court and when you get, state court, which is where I work, when you get prosecuted in state court and when you get convicted of a felony offense, that carries an entire range of consequences that affects your life forever. It really affects your ability to get a job. It affects your ability to ever get a job in your life. It affects your ability in terms of what kinds of professions you can practice. It affects your ability in terms of whether or not you can get an education, because oftentimes you're disqualified from schools, oftentimes you're disqualified from getting student loans because of felony convictions. It disqualifies you from getting housing. And so what we've created in the United States, somewhat unwittingly, is an underclass of people who have felony convictions and who never have the opportunities that those of us in this room have. They don't have the opportunities to have a good job, or to have good housing, or to have good education. And the question really here is not, again, whether the marijuana should be legal or not, but where it should be prosecuted. And when it's prosecuted in city court, some of those consequences that I talked about are less severe, because a city court conviction is technically not a felony conviction. It's something different. And that has those less severe consequences for the people who are convicted of this offense.
I did have a question to clarify something. You mentioned that it's still a crime, but in the rewritten ordinance language that was added, it says if a person obtains a physician's recommendation for marijuana use, charges, possession, paraphernalia, cultivation of up to 6 plants shall be dismissed. So wouldn't that imply that if you have a medical recommendation that it actually does completely decriminalize it? Because if the ordinance is calling or mandating that the charges are dismissed, then it would be totally dismissed.
Well, there appear to be two parts of the ordinance. What I'm saying, there appears to be sort of what I'm going to call a medical marijuana provision, which appears to be the first part. I was really addressing more the second part, policies for enforcement of marijuana laws. That's really what I was talking more about. I do see what you're talking about in terms of the medical marijuana part.
Okay. So and I'll open it up to anybody asking any of the panel members, but I'll take it to Jack and ask you. So if you were on campus, or one of your officers was on campus, and then one of the students was growing 6 plants, and their roommate was growing 6 plants, and they had 12 plants, would you take it to city court, or would you take it to the state?
Well, let me explain a little bit. The University of Missouri Police Department is commissioned as a police department by state statute. So technically, we are state police officers. Chief Burton, Sheriff Carey has kindly allowed us to have special police powers in the city and also in the county, just to relieve any confusion about us enforcing the law outside of the city in the county, if we need to do that, which we do frequently. So to specifically answer your question, we would, if we had someone that was had a marijuana growing operation, we would take it to state court. We wouldn't go to the city court. At the same time, now, if we have a person who is, who we have reason to believe a second time that we have arrested for the possession of marijuana, we automatically take them to state court.
But if it's 35 grams or less, even at state court, it would still be a misdemeanor, would it? Or, yeah.
Yes, but typically we follow the city ordinance. We would take them to city court.
Who has jurisdiction over fraternity houses and off-campus student housing and all the places that students live?
Well, I suspect we all
of us.
Okay.
So actually, how is it determined where cases are brought? If a city policeman arrest somebody, it has to go to city court, and if a deputy, sheriff's deputy, it has to go to county court? I mean, how is it determined where they're prosecuted?
It depends on what the violation is.
Say for the marijuana. I mean,
Depends on how much.
if it's the 6 plants?
If it's a growing operation, I suspect we would go to state court.
From the sheriff's department, we only enforce state statute. We do not enforce any municipal ordinance, either in the city of Columbia or any of the other municipalities within the county. Any offense that we investigate or enforce is going to be a state prosecution.
Can I clarify something that you said about students being denied financial aid? And I will say at the University of Missouri, there's not been one single student denied financial aid because of a drug conviction, not one. Because I've talked to the financial aid director that we have right now and the one we had prior, and they'll use it. Because for one thing, they would have to self-disclose that. It's not like we do a criminal background check on every student that comes to the university. So just so you know, that doesn't happen.
Well, I know that I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm not going to say that. I can say that it does happen, I believe, in other places, however. I think there are restrictions, though, in the student loan, in the federal student loan program.
Well, there are restrictions. It's just
on who can get student loans.
Because they have to write it down themselves.
And I forgot that everybody turned their cell phones.
Well, there's presently a city ordinance making it a city ordinance violation for first offense, possession of less than 35 grams of marijuana. How do each of you deal with that? I mean, there's an arrest made for a first offense under 35 grams in the city of Columbia.
If it's the first offense, we give them a city summons and send them to city court.
Same for us.
Unless there is extenuating circumstances.
Which
there has to be paraphernalia or something else involved, then that changes.
I think it needs to be understood that at the time that an officer encounters an individual in possession of marijuana, the officer is probably not going to have the information available at hand as to whether it's that person's first offense, second offense, third offense. That information is likely not to be found out until much later. From the sheriff's department standpoint, if it's just misdemeanor amounts of marijuana or misdemeanor levels of paraphernalia, and there are no other charges associated with it, the likelihood is that the person's going to receive a ticket. But it's going to be in state court, not in municipal.
So then you would rely on the state prosecutor to transfer that. Well, that case was likely because it wasn't the city of Columbia policy when he transferred to the municipal court. Maybe I should ask the city prosecutor if that's what happens.
Yeah. And I was looking for one of the county prosecutors just to make sure I didn't step on his toes. But what happens is, if it's university or city, and somehow it goes to the state, because again, they don't know when they're arresting a kid in the middle of the night exactly what his background is, and it gets sent to me, and he doesn't meet the criteria to be prosecuted at the city level, I'll call the county, we'll move it. By the same token, if it gets to the county, and they say, hey, this really ought to be at the city, they give me a call, they say, hey, Steve, we're going to send this over, and it comes over. And it works. I mean, it's worked for 4.5 years since I've been there. And so really, if they deserve to be at the city, they're going to be at the city.
So I have a question, and this is at the federal level, in Colorado, it's legal in the state and in the cities, but law enforcement are hesitant because of the federal oversight, and they don't want to be be on the wrong side of the federal people, so that they're still arresting people because of the federal laws.
I have to speak anecdotally to that. I don't
I don't know what's really.
But I mean, that would be the
happening
same here,
enforcement-wise.
is that even if we said it was legal in the state, but then we still have federal laws that say that marijuana is there.
Yeah, but you need to understand too that any law enforcement officer just can't enforce and make arrests on federal law. You have to be a federal law enforcement officer to do that. or carry it. We have city and local and county law enforcement officers that are involved in federal task forces that carry a federal commission that are limited to the scope of that task force. But generally speaking, to go out and make an arrest for a violation of a federal law, one must be a federal officer to do that. I can't just go out and do that.
That's okay, thank you.
You know, I would comment too, back to your question on Mr. Ritchie's about a misdemeanor violation within the city that the sheriff's department would handle. Those do not go to municipal court at this point. Conversations that we've had with Ms. Knight, you know, we arrest on state law violations. That's the court we expect him to be handling. He certainly has the purview to transfer to municipal court, but it's my understanding that arrests made by our agency within the city on marijuana are staying in state court.
And that's been my experience as a defense attorney.
So may I?
I've never seen a county sheriff case come to the city in 4.5 years.
What about state troopers?
You know,
They don't come to the city.
And state troopers, their cases do not come to the city.
So may I rephrase in order to clarify and make sure I'm hearing correctly? Am I hearing correctly that both University of Missouri Police and the Sheriff's Department enforce state law?
We all enforce state
Well,
law.
right, but neither organization is enforcing city.
Oh, no, we enforce it.
They do, the sheriff's department does
It's
not.
not, okay. Both organizations are commissioned as, however you explained, that you're officers of the state. And there are these additional arrangements with the city.
Correct.
I also heard that possession of 35 grams or less at the state level is also a misdemeanor, as it is at the city level.
Correct.
So the ordinance in front of it, the amendments to the ordinance in front of us, are amending the city ordinance to add the permission to cultivate up to 6 plants to the misdemeanor status at the city level. But of course, the state ordinance isn't being amended to allow, or the state law to allow cultivation.
Correct.
So can you help me understand the kind of confusion or not that would present to county residents arrested by the Sheriff's Department outside of the city and/or University of Missouri students?
Before we go too far on that, I just need to clarify that municipal ordinance violations are not misdemeanors. Municipal ordinance violations are municipal ordinance violations.
Okay.
They're akin to a infraction. They are not a,
Okay, so there is-
they're not a misdemeanor, they're not a felony. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it's an important distinction legally.
And something else that's relevant, I think, is that students that live on campus or who are caught on campus, that is state property. That adds doesn't it, Jack, add an additional issue to it that it's state property?
On occasion.
If I can further clarify this, my understanding is the Sheriff's Department and also in Columbia is in Boone County.
Correct.
Sheriff's Department and also the rest of the
Correct. Anywhere within the confines of Boone County, we have jurisdiction with state authority.
So
one of you could, a city person could conceivably arrest someone growing 6 plants, and that if this amendment went into place, then that it might not be a criminal offense. But then if a county person is in the city and arrests the same person, then they would, so you have,
Yeah.
or if it was
You're
on
exactly right.
campus.
Theoretically,
Yeah,
You're
or if it was
exactly
on
right.
campus.
Yeah.
Or a federal agent.
Or a federal.
Well, no, if the county person is in the city, you can still apply the city law. The question is whether the county person is outside of the city. Outside of the city law would not apply.
What it really is, it depends who arrests the county person in the city or the person in the city, because we've heard if it's any police that arrest that person, it would be state law. If it's the sheriff that arrests the city person, it would be state law. If it's state police, it would be state law.
That's up to their policies in terms of where they want to refer the people.
Right.
So I'm not here to say that.
But that's what I think they.
Right. Well, I don't disagree with
But
that.
you also heard there's cases transferred by the state prosecutor to the city.
And I'll just make a point of order that we did actually, Stephanie Moreau was going to come, but had a case and she couldn't, so it would have been nice, but.
And I think I heard Mr. Logic say that the university police for a first offense.
But not for 6 months.
Right. Current
I think, yes, I think what you said.
So the conundrum is, if this were to go through, and a person was growing 6 plants, each of you could have the option of, except for city police.
Even the city, I think, that's just
They
my
could,
opinion.
they could do it under state law.
Sure. Still a violation of state law.
But
You know, I'd like to make a comment real quick. I think I can, most of my law enforcement counterparts would agree with me here. We don't care what the laws are, but they're on the books. And so we've sworn to uphold the law. And that's where the quandary comes in, is it's putting us in a terrible position. Right here in Boone County, we're saying, and our citizens have got to be confused. I think some of you hit on it already, that if I'm in Boone County and I'm not within the city limits, I'm going to get treated one way for the same violation. It's going to be completely different in the city, and potentially it could be different on the university campus. And that's just not fair to the people in general. It's confusing. It's completely, I think, unwise. And I think if we, and like I said, I don't think any of us care if you legalize it, but you got to do it the right way to keep from putting our police officers in just terrible positions.
I would add that I think it does confuse particularly the residents inside the city of Columbia, and it may give them a false sense of security about, okay, it's not illegal. When, in fact, I mean, the basic premise of law considered 101, federal law trumps state law, trumps municipal law, and one cannot directly conflict with another. And that's exactly what this ordinance does currently, and even with an amendment to it would continue to do. So I think the chief's absolutely right that addressing this issue is best done at the state and federal level, not at municipal level.
Well, I agree with I agree with what Chief Burke said, up to the point of whether, I don't care what you do with it or not. I actually do care.
But laws, I'm just talking about laws.
I hear you. I think it's really a bad idea, as you said. I think there's a lot of statistics out there that says marijuana use causes a lot of different problems. And on campus, you know, we deal with 18 to 25-year-olds. I can tell you it's increasing and it's getting worse. And every one of those people that we deal with, and I'm sure Kim can give you a lot of stats also, it's a problem for us.
So after 40 years of draconian drug war, things are getting worse.
We see more marijuana cases now.
The other thing.
I have a very basic question, which will pardon me if this is already, if everyone else understands this, but I don't have a mental picture of how much marijuana is 35 grams. And I don't have a mental picture of how many grams 6 plants constitutes. Somebody help me with that?
28 grams is an ounce. 28 grams is an ounce.
Well, I know
35. You're talking about an ounce, you're talking about think of a sandwich baggie, and put 3 fingers together and roll it up. That's about an ounce.
That's a
How
lot.
does that relate to the amount of marijuana in 6 plants?
I actually have someone here that can probably describe in much better detail what you can expect one marijuana plant to produce, as well as 6 marijuana plants if the board would like to entertain hearing. His name is Detective Sergeant Britt Shea. He's in charge of our drug enforcement unit, and he can speak pretty eloquently to that question if you'd like.
Yes, ultimately, I would like one. Yeah.
Well, I'll give you a quick answer. There's lots and lots of variables for growing a marijuana plant. If you put a seed in soil and put it in your windowsill, it'll grow, and you're going to end up with a kind of a scraggly plant that has certainly, properties you can buy, but it's not going to yield a bunch of marijuana. To really push the potential of a plant, you need to add a lot of nutrients to it, and you need to add a lot of light to it. A very conservative estimate, and there's lots of other variables here, but I'm just trying to simplify this. A very conservative estimate would be an indoor grow, a plant. You have to think of the 6 plants, think of it more as 6 slots, okay? Because you can have 6 plants at any one time, but anybody who knows what they're doing isn't going to have 6 plants all in the same stage of growth. They're going to have a baby and then one that's ready to harvest. So they have a constant supply of marijuana. And they're going to try to cycle the plants, so they always have one ready to harvest and they always have one starting. Okay? So it's 6 slots, and you're going to have, in one of those slots, you're going to have a plant at any given size. Indoors, with artificial light, you could probably take a baby plant from seed to maturity, harvest, and do that 3 times a year. Okay? So each slot would produce 3 mature plants a year. Does that make sense? Okay. And a mature plant inside might produce a 1/4 pound of marijuana each time. Okay, and a pound is 454 grams, so a 1/4 pound is, a little bit more than 100 grams of marijuana. So.
I'm sorry, did you say all that again? Not the part about 3 mature
okay. Each plant, each slot would produce
3 mature plants.
3 mature plants a year. Each mature plant would produce maybe a 1/4 pound. That's a very conservative estimate. So that means each slot produces 0.75 pounds a year. So 0.75 pounds times 6 is 4 point something.
But possession,
4
possession is at any one point in time.
Correct, and that's exactly right. Possession is at any one point in time. So at any one point in time, you're going to have one plant that may be ready to harvest with a 1/4 pound of marijuana, and one that has less, one that has less, one that has less, one that has less, all the way down to a baby that's this big.
Can you dry it and store it?
It's a good question. I would imagine that once it's this ordinance doesn't really address processed marijuana. So after it's been taken off the plant and processed, it's probably going to fall into the 35 grams or less part of the ordinance. But that's an interesting question.
And then one of our public comments involved with harnessing some oil off of it. And I was reading that you put the oil in the e-cigarettes and it doesn't have the odor.
And that's another very interesting topic is how that's addressed in this ordinance. And it isn't really, it isn't talked about. But the way that the state law deals with that is they just deal with the marijuana is determined whether it's marijuana or not, whether it has the THC, the chemicals in it that get you high. So it doesn't matter if it's a plant or an oil or something else. The chemist would be able to measure whether it has that certain chemical in it. But those are all interesting points, and they're not directly addressed.
So you're only talking about indoor, what about outdoor?
Outdoors is much higher potential. Your plants can get much, much bigger, feet tall, 5, 6, 7, 8 feet tall, and they can produce a lot more marijuana if you have the right conditions.
So when they talk about 35 grams, it would either be the plants or the dried marijuana?
Generally, the folks that are going to be taking the time.
No, in terms of the way the ordinance is now, what's a misdemeanor. So it would be the plant counts as part of 35 grams, or just the leaves, or just what's dried?
Again, that's very interesting. It doesn't matter from a law enforcement's perspective. It doesn't matter what part of the plant we have, whether it's leaves, flowers, stems, as long as it has the chemicals in it, THC being the most known chemical, then it's considered marijuana. I can tell you that the folks that are going to take the time to grow the marijuana indoors are going to be buying high-quality seeds, and they're going to be going after the flowers. The buds of the plant is generally the most desirable part of the plant.
Well, under state law, there is a definition, and under state law, you don't count the mature stalks. The mature stalks are not actually counted as marijuana, so you've got to separate when you're prosecuting. You've got to separate under the state law what actually part of the plant constitutes the drug part of the plant, and mature stalks is not part of it. I would also say that this example that's just been given assumes that everybody under the ordinance is going to grow 6 plants, and I don't know that that's really the case. Currently, if you grow even 1 plant, you get prosecuted in state court for the felony. So it doesn't just, it just assumes that everybody who's getting caught is growing 6 plants, and I'm not sure that that's going to be the case.
I had a question, I don't know who can answer, maybe you could answer it. Right now, if you are growing that 1 plant, you are in state court, and if you're 1,000 feet of a school, or if there's children in
It's 2,000 feet of a school.
or 2,000, and there's children, does it change the type
Yes,
of
it does change it. If you're doing that within 2,000 feet of a school, which this building would be because we're near West Boulevard Elementary School, someone were across the street growing 1 marijuana plant, they would face 15 to 30 years in prison or life in prison.
But, and maybe to carry that 1 step further, so under the ordinance, if they were doing it and they were arrested by a city police officer who sent it to municipal court, they would be okay. But if they were arrested by a county sheriff who sent it to state court, they may still be in trouble even with this ordinance.
Absolutely.
And it's important to know that the city police officers would still have the option of taking it to the state if there were extenuating circumstances related to the arrest. So there's no guarantee. And that's the danger of telling our citizens that you can have 6 plants. Because there is no guarantee.
Right, and I would agree that there's no guarantee. And in fact, I've talked to people in our public defender office, and we agree to this extent, that it will require some, to make it work, it would require some coordination between the law enforcement and the prosecutor's office and the city prosecutor in terms of coming up with a policy on how you want to make it work.
So, I wonder if I could ask our collective experts to return to Mrs. Scala's question, because I'm still not clear on how many joints 6 plants produce in a month or a year. Well, I'm dating.
The simple answer is joint.
Are we talking like Caribbean Rasta joint?
Marijuana.
Under state, the current state law, they are capable of producing felony amounts of marijuana easily. That's a simple.
More than 35 grams.
Correct. Yes, ma'am. Correct.
So you would possess it anyway.
More than 35 grams easily. 1 plant would be capable of producing more than 35 grams quite easily.
If this were in place and you had all your 6 plants in your various stages of growth, and it was a container garden or whatever in your house, and you had to move, and you put those plants in your car, and you drove somewhere, and you get pulled over, then what happens?
You go to jail.
That's
Seriously.
Yeah. So you would have to destroy those plants and start all over again.
Well, and I think that, for the 3 gentlemen, I think that's why you have to look at the state law, and that's why it has to be addressed at the state level. I mean, you can't just corral an ordinance into a little area, and I understand, and I sympathize with Greg here. You know, and I may agree or disagree with the law, but it really has to be done on the state level. Otherwise, it's way too confusing. And there's, well, do I do this? I mean, I picture myself as an officer. I mean, what do I do? Do this, do that? You know, do I follow this? Do I follow that law? I mean, we have to follow the law. The law is law. And until the law changes, we have to follow the law. I mean, that's just the way it goes.
Do we really want to create a mechanism?
For possession of marijuana works very well.
Already creates that conundrum. It does.
So we have that, but it has saved a lot of people much harsher consequences, especially in the university town where we have students who want to become professionals and make enough money to become good taxpayers and good citizens.
But it also has increased our use.
I
mean, our data shows it has increased our
Well,
use.
your data, when I was becoming a pilot, I had friends that smoked marijuana. I didn't, because I wanted to be a pilot. You make choices, and choices have consequences. And if it's against the law, so is drinking and driving. That's a consequence, and that's a choice. But if you do it, you face the consequences of that choice until the law change.
For young people especially, it's important that the person would stay kind of on them and destroy their lives.
And I agree. That's why we need to change it at a state
This
law.
is actually there are 2 parts to this too. There's also the other half that we actually haven't started to talk about yet. But, you know, if you had this, that it would affect those people too, and those people would not be subject, like we talked about, they wouldn't be subject to.
Is medical marijuana legal in Missouri? There you go. It's not legal, sorry. Move to Colorado.
I have another question, but also, I think in terms of numbers.
But excuse me, thank you for bringing that up, Michael, because I do think we need to return to those issues. Okay, so, go ahead.
My other question is, how many people have been affected by, or how many people have been prosecuted for growing marijuana in Columbia in the last however long time, year, 5 years, and what consequences have they suffered as a result, or have they received as a result?
I can't provide you any statistics, didn't try and research any before this meeting tonight, as far as how many different forms of drug arrests there are. Part of that's a report system problem as far as a misdemeanor marijuana arrest is going to show up as a drug arrest, and it may not necessarily.
Well, I presume this would be a felony, right?
Well, the growth, yes.
Marijuana is a felony.
But the state law is possession, distribution, manufacture under one number. So whether it's a growth, whether it's they were just selling it, not growing, trying to make those distinctions is going to be almost impossible.
Because there haven't been that many of them.
Yeah. I can address it a little bit. I can only speak for what we see in our Boone County Public Defender Office. And actually, we don't see very many growing cases. And it may be sort of surprising, but we actually don't. I don't have a specific number for you, but I asked the person who's actually in charge of our Columbia office how many they see, and they said they actually don't see very many here in Columbia.
How many people, how many young people are facing a felony drug charge for a small amount of marijuana? Aren't the vast majority of them misdemeanor?
I can't speak to that. I'm sorry, I don't have a statistic for you on that.
Because
That's
that's
different.
It's different.
But I've been wondering, from the gloom and doom that it's being painted of these students that their lives are being ruined.
Oh no, there's lots of people convicted of felonies for marijuana.
That's my question. But young people or?
It's mostly young people. We don't have a lot of grandmas who are getting convicted of marijuana.
And everybody who has purchased an ounce of marijuana, the person that sold it to them committed a felony. If they were allowed to grow their own, they're out of the drug trade. They're away from the people who make a living selling marijuana.
They're
still in the drug trade.
Young children or young people work at the university hospital and they do random drug testing. And even a tiny, tiny amount of THC on that drug test, well, you'll be fired. And that's on your record forever. We're not talking 35 grams here. We're not possession. So it's a serious thing. And I don't think the university is the only place that does drug testing.
No, I think employers, private employers have the right to do that.
A lot of them do.
And so when you're talking about ruining the rest of your life, you may not be doing it. And I have to say, a couple of the cases I heard recently, it was secondhand. So it wasn't even, you know, but if you're in a room with somebody who's smoking,
but this ordinance
and
wouldn't
you
change
go
it.
the next
The reality-
day and get your blood drawn, you're going to have just a little bit in there, and you're not going to have a job. So it has a snowball.
Yeah, but this ordinance wouldn't change that. I mean, there's still these businesses who don't want to have somebody employed that is under the influence of any kind of drug like that. My point is, when you decriminalize, you make it more enticing for, you're going to increase use when you decriminalize. Either because they're less likely to get in trouble or they perceive it as being not as harmful. And so that tends to increase use. And so these students are a whole lot more likely to get drug tested than they are to get arrested and prosecuted. And so the mere fact that they have marijuana in the class for about 30 days or longer, then my point is, by decriminalizing, we're actually going to increase use and hurt them more than if they got arrested. As far as the number of people impacted.
there's actually good evidence to the contrary of that, because some people only use it because they're attracted to it because it's illegal, forbidden fruit syndrome. And I think it was 82 that the National Academy of Sciences did a study on that and looked at states that had decriminalized. We have a lot of states for many years that decriminalized, and they concluded that usage did not go up as a result. The law made no difference.
It's still not clear to me. I have a question. If the ordinance is revised in terms of, for example, cultivation, does that mandate the city police officers to refer the case to city court, or how does that work? Is it still at the option of the officer, the police chief, or are they, with the revised ordinance, is it mandatory that cases, these types of cases, to be even looked at are referred to the city? I mean, how does this work? How would this work in terms of how the police officer operates?
It wouldn't. That's my point, is that it wouldn't work. Because we still have to give our officers the discretion to make the arrest and give it to the prosecution the way they see fit. And those different details, those extenuating circumstances are going to be different in every case.
But when you say give it to the prosecutor, do they automatically give it to the city prosecutor, or they determine which prosecutor
They
it goes
can
to?
determine on their own based on any extenuating circumstances. Every case is going to be different. So if you've got someone who has 6 plants and he fights the police when they go there, that's going to go to state.
Yeah.
You might have somebody that has these 6 plants, these theoretical 6 plants, that is in a stage 4 cancer patient, and the officer would have the discretion to send it to municipal court. But I don't think we want to do that with our police officers' discretion. They have discretion every day, and they make those kinds of decisions every day. And it's based on extenuating circumstances that surround that arrest.
It would work the same way as the possession ordinance does now.
Am I hearing you say that the conundrum you described exists now with the possession ordinance?
Absolutely it does.
And the addition of the question of cultivation would exacerbate?
Absolutely, that's correct.
I have one more question. This only addresses one person, and let's say I'm living in a house with 5 other students. Does that mean each of us can grow 6 plants?
Not my.
I'm just
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your question.
Multiple people.
If there are 6 people in the house, do all 6 of them get to grow, so then we have 36 plants? Doesn't say that it's.
That's currently the way it's drafted.
I think the language
That's
of
just
the
for one?
statute, I think the language of the ordinance is ambiguous enough that it can be interpreted in each and every individual in that residence.
Yeah, that would be a concern.
That is correct, and it's written per person, it's not written per adult or per, it is written per person.
And not per house.
It's correct.
I would also point out that even the ordinance as written currently attempts to force a specific type of enforcement, because from the ordinance itself, that person shall not be required to post bond, suffer arrest, be taken into custody for any purpose, or detained for any reason other than the issuance of a summons. So the current ordinance already attempts to take the hands or the discretion away from the officers who are dealing with the situation at hand.
Say there are extenuating circumstances, and pot use was just one of them. I mean, those other charges would still be sent somewhere. I mean, you could still file charges on that person in state or whatever court that you would want to send it. But not would be able to do that. And then the pot charge would maybe be sent to, if as drafted, it could be sent to city court. Would that be just too crazy? I mean, I couldn't help it. Just something I thought.
For us, that would be too crazy.
Yeah, it's a good thing. More attorney fees.
It's actually a waste of judicial resources.
Yeah.
We call it splitting tickets.
Yeah.
And it wastes time. You end up with people that don't know where they're supposed to be. So it's like, you want judicial economy. You want one prosecutor, one case.
Okay. So ultimately, this amendment would be symbolic for most people in terms of tobacco tickets.
Dangerously symbolic. I think it would lull people into a false sense of security. they start cultivating and go to prison. That's where they end up.
I mean, you look at it, it just, not even as a prosecutor, but you go, okay, I'm going to grow this wonderful plant. When I was at the University of Mississippi in a different life, they had the only legalized marijuana grow in the world. They were the most beautiful plants you've ever seen, and they were as tall as the ceiling. So basically what we're saying is, you can grow this plant, but you can't use it, because the instant that you take it off of that plant and process it, and throw out the stems and the seeds and everything else that isn't part of the state statute, and you're now, I don't know, you're in the pounds of marijuana. So how do we say you can grow it and then you can't possess it to use it because you're now a felon? And the chief and the county sheriff cannot stop the highway patrol from enforcing state law. They can't stop the feds from coming into Columbia and enforcing federal law. So a kid goes, well, I'm just growing plants, and he says it's okay. The feds don't care. And they will win. The state highway patrol will win. And it's a, you're just setting it up for well, you guys weren't. But it's a recipe for disaster for a lot of people. I mean, I think
it is still against the law.
The marijuana ordinance as it sits in the city works well. We take the cases that need to be at the city level and deal with them. And the county does a good job of sending those to us if they're city cases. And those cases that need to be at the state, we do a good job of sending them to. If you've read the ordinance, it talks about if you've got felonies, if you've got other misdemeanors, that we don't have to take it at the city level. And I could go through my cases and send dozens of them to the state and be well within my rights according to the ordinance, but we don't do it because it's a misdemeanor. It's a minor pot case. Even if the guy's a felon, 9 times out of 10, if it comes to me, I keep it. It's a $50, $100 fine. So the ordinance as it is for that possession works very well. And I don't think anyone suffers too greatly from it unless they fit the criteria to go to the state level.
So could you continue that line of thinking and articulate why you feel this would not warrant this? What's different about, I understand what it has to do with a felony versus.
Because what happens is the officer stops them and looks at it and goes, okay, you got it. And the typical case I see is the kids at the university are sitting out in a lot out behind that school, smoking a pipe of marijuana, and invariably they don't have any more with them than that. Okay, they've got just enough to go out and get high. One of the university officers is going through the parking lot and smells it. He says, okay, what's going on? They roll down the windows and it looks just like in the movies. The smoke comes out and they arrest him for a misdemeanor amount of marijuana. That comes to me, okay? That's entirely different than the kid who's got 2 or 3 baggies in his room, which easily a prosecutor can make a case that it's packaged for sale, okay? Once you get beyond 1 or 2 baggies, then it's easy to say, well, what's that for? Well, you're distributing, okay, which changes the game entirely. And so, losing my train of thought.
So the quantity is what?
Well, if it's beyond the 35 grams, an officer can pretty much estimate and say, hey, that's a felony amount. And the weighing of it happens at the station after the kid's already cuffed and put in the car. And so it doesn't make it to the felony level, then it comes down to a misdemeanor, and hell, it may even come back over to us.
I agree with you. The opposite of that we also run into, he's exactly right about the in the car, and we know all of those things. But then you run into the 18-year-old kid in a residence hall that has several baggies full of marijuana with a scale with $11,000 in his safe, you know, that's the felony.
Right, so, but what I'm asking is how, in relation to this proposal, why this would be more problematic for enforcement than the current system of the city ordinance regarding
But
Say it's working.
I don't know that it would be more of a problem for us, because if they're growing it, they're automatically going to go to state court.
So it's
to grow felony.
So
It's automatically, the growing is automatically a felony. And it's a bright line rule, the growing is a felony at the state level. And so I think based upon the statistics that we heard earlier, each plant is going to produce 100 grams a year. It's going to produce 100 grams per growing season. It does that 3 times a year, so each plant is going to produce 300 grams. If you have 6 plants, you can produce up to 1,800 grams. And so if I did the math correctly, and I'm no mathematician, I do the lawyer math, so I try to do it a little bit logically, but that would allow one person or per person to produce about 5 grams per day.
which they would not.
They have to have,
On the average.
that's assuming they have
That's-
green thumb.
Well, that's assuming that they've got their grow operation set up, and I think what we heard was if you're gonna go to the trouble to do it, you're probably gonna be fairly sophisticated in doing it, because why not? But, so at 5 grams a day, if you're producing that much, or if you're producing 100 grams out of one plant, the minute you begin to cultivate that, or minute you begin to cultivate that plant, or process it, thank you. You are already going to be at the felony level because you're going to have 100 grams from one plant. That gets you over the 35 grams. So you're also on the possession side going to be, when you begin to process it, the one plant, you're going to be at the felony possession level.
There's almost virtually no way that you can consume the marijuana at such a rate as to never be in excess of 35 grams of marijuana while you're doing the growing. The growing of the plants themselves and the 35-gram distinction, the plants are not being taken into consideration in this ordinance as being towards that 35 grams. It's the 35 grams relates to the processed marijuana that's been harvested off the plant. But I mean, you're going to be stoned a lot all the time.
You guys are all assuming that it's so easy to grow. I mean, my wife and I started a herb garden with sage and rosemary and that kind of thing, and I tell you, cilantro. You don't want to tell me the secret to it, it's not working. But the guy's got the scales and the $11,000 and he's selling, that's a felony. And you got these kids that are smoking behind the vet school. They get their drugs from the guy that is the felon, right? And although it would still be against the law, if they're able to grow their own, they wouldn't have to go to.
But it's still against
They
the law.
would still be a felon if they're growing.
Now if we change it to the city ordinance, where it wouldn't be a felony.
It would be
It still will be according to state.
You know, under state law, it still would be. As it's still under federal law, against the law in Colorado and Washington.
Absent a state statute that is similar to the writing of this ordinance, I think the only thing, should this amendment pass, is that we open up the citizens of Columbia to what was mentioned earlier, just disastrous consequences and it doesn't decriminalize it. It's saying that, you know, with the other terminology that we have to address upon recommendation. But you could have a neighbor that knows that their neighbor's growing pot, and they call the highway patrol, and they start keeping a list, and one day they decide to come to Columbia, and guess what? Half the city of Columbia is arrested on felonies. There's nothing that this amendment's going to do for them.
And they're under a false pretense, well, I thought it was legal. I thought it was legal.
Well, it's not. It's still gonna be against the law.
But most people aren't gonna know this.
Oh, I think you can give people more credit for that.
Oh, I don't get these.
So could I ask our panelists
Not at
again
all.
to clarify, in response to what Marie was probing, a reason that the disconnects between the municipal ordinance, if amended, and state law would be more problematic than the current scenario of 35 grams or less being a traffic ticket that seems to work all right because you've worked it out, is because the distinction in penalty or in the level of offense between what the amended ordinance would be and state law is much greater? Is it because we're now talking about a traffic ticket compared to a felony as opposed to a traffic ticket as compared to a misdemeanor?
That's part of the state.
On the state level.
And
And then, of course, the questions we've talked about how does quantity get translated between the amount of plants and the amount once processed.
I think it needs to be understood too that law enforcement most often coming in contact with somebody who's in the misdemeanor possession level, the recreational use that, you know, maybe they're not into dealing, selling, all that kind of stuff. Those are already handled by, here's your ticket with your court date, thank you very much. Majority of the cases, there's usually some other extenuating circumstance for someone in other charges before somebody is actually put handcuffs on and you go to jail and have to post bond on misdemeanor marijuana.
In terms of the medical marijuana aspect of this, and I guess it would really only apply this to city police officers, if the individual did have, for example, a prescription from a physician, would it be easy to have, would that be a condition that officers would readily be able to determine that it doesn't need to be moved off to state court?
Not easily, no.
Because
where did the prescription come from?
No, I mean, if
all that would have to be verified,
Yeah.
and so it's not going to clarify anything.
But if they would have a prescription, in other words, you go to her house and she has the plants and the officers, you know, and she shows them the prescription from Mike, who's a physician, would that kind of thing be clear enough that?
Every situation is going to be different, and if you walk in there and you clearly see it's somebody who's very ill, and it has obviously that officer has discretion there. So what I would hope they would do is confiscate the illegal substance and document it if somebody is obviously ill. What you're talking about is going in as long as somebody's got something off of somebody's prescription pad, they're okay. No, you'd have to make the arrest, and that would have to be sorted out later.
And let me clarify, as a physician, I cannot prescribe marijuana because my DEA does not allow that. It's in a class that wouldn't allow that. And that's why the ordinance says a physician's recommendation.
And what does a recommendation mean?
And I wanted to ask that question. So right now, how would you handle if somebody says, well, I've got a physician recommendation, how is that handled currently? I mean, obviously, the police won't know, so
there's never been one.
So nobody has ever
Not
pulled
the
one out.
4.5 years I've been here, there's never been a person that said, I have a physician's recommendation.
Well, from a city
We don't know on
perspective,
the county level.
from a city perspective,
It wouldn't matter.
It wouldn't matter because there's no provision in state law for medical marijuana. If a person arrested for even a misdemeanor or felony amount of marijuana wanted to use that as a defense, they would go through their defense counsel and try and raise that defense in court, but it would not be evidence at the time the arrest is made.
but from the city council's perspective, what does a physician recommendation mean?
I have no idea. I didn't write it.
What would you be advising the city prosecutor? I don't know whether you advise him, or what would you advise him that a recommendation means?
You know, I think we would just have to take a look at the documentation that's been provided and see if we think it meets the definition. If they haven't seen one, it means that it's certainly not something that physicians in our area are writing, but you have to verify that it's actually coming from a licensed physician and that it's a recommendation based upon a medical necessity or medical need, not just But that's going to take some proof and some verification by the person who does the presentation. It really isn't, it's not a simple answer as to what would qualify. We'd actually just have to see what was presented and try to take a look at it.
So I'm sure currently there's no point because there's no provision in law. So what
Right, there is.
No, there is right now.
Oh.
The medical, you can, there's section 16255.1
Right.
is there currently.
And that's part of the language that was approved previously by the voters. So that was in the original medical marijuana ordinance of 35 grams total.
But it actually hasn't.
It has not come up.
So I'm going to ask a question about THC, not marijuana. And I think at the last meeting you said, Mike, did you say that there were tablets that they give children that have THC in them? Tablets for people who have pain?
You mean you buy a prescription? Yeah.
Yes, so there are tablets that you can buy or the doctor prescribed them for you that would be legal. And so why would someone who needed medical marijuana or THC have to go and grow a plant when you can get it from your physician as a prescription in tablet form? Now,
I can answer that. Well, the problem with the tablets is there's what's known as first pass metabolism because it'll go through your liver. So you actually get sort of a different effect from that. Okay. And some people feel that it's a little bit harder to sort of self-regulate. You know, the thing now when you're in a lot of pain in the hospital, you can put your little morphine drip kind of thing and you get it right away. When you take a tablet, it doesn't work that way. That said, and whereas if you smoke a little bit more if you need a little more effect. You smoke less if you need less effect. So there is that advantage.
But on that same.
Well, I was just going to, let me just finish. That said, what actually is currently being worked on as legal in other countries is a sublingual spray that actually then has that effect because it doesn't have to pass through your liver. So you can squirt again, and you can squirt as much as you want.
All right, so the other thing is that plants have different levels of THC and also the plant parts. And I was really aware of that when I was watching that documentary about Colorado stores where they have, this one has a certain level, this one has another level, and so forth. And so if you're a physician or even a person, how do you know? How do you regulate something when this plant here is got 10%, this is got 30%, and so forth? Is that too much?
So I have a question of process for the chairs regarding our conversation about the medical marijuana side of this. We've had the opportunity to review quite a bit of literature about the efficacy or not of medical use of marijuana, and the risks or not, and questions of dosage and quality and prescribing processes, and some of the conversation we're headed into now. And my question for the proceedings of this group is that a pathway of conversation that's productive for us given the amendment being proposed? Are we here to adjudicate the question of the efficacy of medical marijuana, which our collective boards might indeed want to talk about, but might not be the question under consideration? Or, and I truly am asking this as a question, not a presumption, are the issues associated with legalization, in the case of medical marijuana, of a growing operation, the same issues that we've been talking about regarding adding that to the ordinance for recreational use?
Well, I think the distinction is that it's still against the law to cultivate, but there is a defense. Different, example, you could have sclerosis or something and have a medical recommendation from a doctor, but
is there a defense at the state level from the felony?
No, state level.
Yeah, I agree with you. It would be very pertinent if a medical defense related to the fact that it's a state felony.
But your question, you were asking the chairs, what are we trying to answer here? And I'm going to go back to what I said at the last meeting is that we're not really here to debate the current ordinance because that's law and it was passed by the voters and it's 35 grams. What we're really here and we're not here to debate medical marijuana. clarify, because that's part of the original ordinance. What we're here is to discuss whether or not it's a good idea for the health of the individual to start allowing people to grow up to 6 plants. And, you know, it was interesting in my mind, you know, Dan Dietz had mentioned at the first meeting that it's unhealthy to be in prison. And from what I'm hearing, I'm a little bit concerned that we might have more people that inadvertently end up in prison because they think they can grow pot in Colombia if they've got a doctor's note and they're going to get in trouble.
No, I think if you want to break it down, we need to look at each part of it, because for the cultivation, it relates to both medical and non-medical. So that, because it says both can do it, and one becomes a misdemeanor. No, in the new ordinance.
Yeah, but even in the new ordinance, one becomes a misdemeanor, one becomes a shall be dismissed. So they're both sort of
No, but you need, but you can still, in terms of our discussion, particularly from a Board of Health perspective, I think it makes sense to break that down, and we can talk about it in each separate category, whether in terms from a health perspective, whether it makes some sense to have people who need medical marijuana, allow them to cultivate it, recognizing that folks have to take the consequences. There may be a discussion on that, and that may be separate from allowing anybody to cultivate it and be treated as a misdemeanor. That's one thing. The other thing is whether we want to deal with the issue of incarceration as a health issue. Because basically they're going to get caught and they're going to be locked up in terms of cultivation, given what's being said, because it's against state law. City police most likely will refer it upward, and the sheriff's department has to, and the university has to. So the question is, do you want to treat that as a medical issue, incarceration, or simply say, deal with the two medical parts, recognizing that people really have to take responsibility if they know what the penalties are, and maybe even make it clear in the ordinance that this only applies to being arrested, or however you want it, by city police, and if it's referred to city court, you let people take the consequences.
Well, so if you are growing marijuana in the house, whether you are a stage 4 cancer patient or you just want to use recreational marijuana, several things would have to happen so you would not get in trouble. This would be true for both those circumstances. You'd have to be in the city, but not on campus, and get busted by Ken's people, but not top people or Jack's people, or the highway patrol, and then Ken's people would have to use the discretion then to, so there would have to be so many things that align to, that you not get in trouble for doing that, even though we have a law that says that you can do that.
Yeah,
and defining not getting in trouble, police have a saying, you may get out of the conviction, but you're not going to get out of the ride downtown.
Yeah.
They're going to be in trouble.
Right.
No, but
it's going to be expensive. Whether they've got a defense that will mitigate the damages more or less.
No, but from a public health, from a Board of Health perspective, and substance abuse, you deal with it the way you want. But from a public health perspective, we should really be dealing with the public health aspects of it. If there's concerns about incarceration and it's going to ruin their lives, then if that becomes, if you want to deal with that under public health, then we look at the public health aspects of it. If you want to broaden the view of what we're considering in terms of public health, if people are dumb and they want to take the chance and hope that they're arrested by city police, that's none of our business if we don't look at incarceration as a public health issue. If we say we only want to look at this with respect to public health aspects, there's stupidity is really not a public health issue.
Well, I think we've got law enforcement people here mostly, and one aspect that would be to look at would be violence in our community. We tend to focus on the university and that sort of thing, but and I'm sorry, Chief Burton left because I'd like him to speak on it, but we read in the papers that the violence that occurs in the African American neighborhood, and fights over a lot of fights over turf, and basically the drug war at its worst. And what would be the effects if kids didn't have to get involved in that and still be able to choose that as their drug of choice and grow enough for themselves and not get involved in the violence?
Okay, Iowa, go
I
ahead.
think what I would like to know is, we can't be the only community facing this issue. I'd like to know how other communities are handling it.
So part of the problem with that is we have this time frame. In August, the council wants this back. Let me just mention this. Harry, I understand what you're saying. I don't know that the ordinance was sent for us to start working with it. And I see lots of other health-related issues that I could be focusing on. For example, the change from adults to persons, which means that kids can grow marijuana plants. The fact that there's nothing mentioned about whether the plants need to be secure or in an enclosed space like the Colorado ordinance mentions. Nothing talks about, access for children in the house and how you're going to do all that. And so, whether or not, if you're growing 6 plants, let me finish, and you've got 5 people and that's 5 times 6 and you've got 30 plants and you've got 1,000-watt bulbs and everything else. So there's nothing in here about that. And so if we wanted to get into the health of growing, that would be other things that we would need to look at. I don't know that that was what it was sent to us for, and I don't know that we have time.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. And maybe we need some information from the city council. Well, we sent this to basically say, give us a recommendation, yes or no, and don't diddle with it. Or were we given it in order to say, okay, this is what's being proposed. You have recommendations, as we did with some of the others, to make alterations in the wording, to add, subtract, or whatnot. And it's never been clear to me whether they simply want to, you got this, say yes or say no, and give us your reasons, and that's it. Or do we really look at this and try to amend it and send it back? And again, it's never been clear.
I would think they'd want to know about any concerns we have and any advantages we see.
We could spend a lot of time debating public health issues of all of this, but if the law is flawed, then is that, in my mind, it sort of becomes the point, because we'll go on around about that whole thing, but then it's flawed and it doesn't pass anyway. So I don't know.
But that doesn't really matter if it's flawed, because my understanding when this was first sent to us, there was a city, I guess the council's recommendation, a sound council's comment, and it was 1 or 2 sentences that basically said it's against the law or something like that.
It was inconsistent with both state and federal law.
And the council basically said, we don't give a heck. Otherwise, they wouldn't have sent it to us. So, again, I'm not sure what we...
Yeah. So, well, let's hear from the other board members. What do you guys want to do? I mean...
May I ask a point of fact, just for
Sure.
clarification before we continue this discussion? This is, again, a very basic point, but you mentioned it. Does this wording then apply to minors in schools?
Yes, it does. For the medical side.
For everything.
The medical. No, this is the medical side.
Only for the medical.
Thank you. Does it
Both
apply?
use and cultivation for medical purposes would now apply to persons of home.
And it doesn't matter if the plants are in the house or outside of the house, but just on property.
Construction.
How do we determine
How would you know? You're in court, how do you know?
Well, they have to-
Well, knowing a physician no is illegal in Missouri, so.
Again, you have to worry about what's a recommendation and how is that proved and where did that come from, and then you go.
Because it's illegal for physicians in Missouri to make a recommendation.
It'd be up to these gentlemen to convince this gentleman that, I mean, that's what it is. It's up to these two gentlemen to convince this gentleman that they have a physician's recommendation. I mean, that's ultimately what happens. And the judge.
And the judge.
And the judge.
And a jury. So
So, you know, those, but if it gets dismissed, it's gonna come through the process.
And for what it's worth, this goes back to the comments several people have made about the difficulty of solving these problems, and excessive penalties are things I think that are problems, but the difficulty of solving those at a municipal level as opposed to a state or federal level. Because some of these questions about how does one document amount of medical defense in the states that have legalized medical use of marijuana, those questions have been answered in state law and state procedures. And that's not the case in our context. So we'd be this microcosm of having locally legalized something. And in the case of medical use, we are saying legalized, not just diminished penalties, of something where those questions of procedure are unanswered.
And can I just say that I think the council would be well received by them. If you make a recommendation one way or the other on the existing ordinance, and if your recommendation would be in the negative, and you have additional recommendations to make for them to consider that you think would be appropriate if they want to move forward anyway, I think those would certainly be suggestions that would be well received. On your part, you're talking about what is your role and where do you go, and is it just a yes or no, or there should be other recommendations? And I think if you either have a yes or a no, or a yes with conditions, or a no, and if the council wants to move forward, these are things that you think they should consider be included, such as securing the plan, setting a maximum number, those kinds of things. I think that's the kind of information that would be well received and that they would really appreciate hearing from this group. Those kinds of additional recommendations.
I would just say I do not think it is within the scope of this discussion to change the existing ordinance without the plan.
Right.
Okay, the proposed ordinance. Sorry, then
The proposed ordinance. So if you see some things that really, that cause you to say no, and maybe it would be okay if these kinds of safeguards were put in, or if there is no way that this group thinks that there should be any change whatsoever. Those are the kinds of things they'd like to hear, I'm sure.
So theoretically, you'd say no because it should be fewer plans, it should regulate where they can be, it should regulate whatever.
With these kinds of safeguards in place, it might be okay.
Well, and it could also be no, we don't think it's a good idea, but if we're going to do it anyways, here's some suggestions. Or we could say yes, we think it's a good idea, but if you're going to do it, here are some suggestions.
Correct. I don't think it's just a total thumbs up or thumbs down kind of feedback that they're looking for from this group. It is, I'm sorry.
I would like to reiterate that there's all sorts of evidence out there that the more you decriminalize marijuana, the more there is an increase in use. Just bottom line, that's what data shows. Certainly in Colorado, I mean, this is a packet from Colorado. The whole thing is the impact of the legalization of marijuana in Colorado.
How old is that law?
Well, they have data already comparing significant increase in use from all ages. And I heard a doctor from Colorado talk about the fact that at these marijuana shops, there's a kiosk outside many of them where there's a physician there that for $100 will write you a permission. That's what can potentially happen. And my point is simply that it will increase use, especially among our youth, because they will perceive that it's an okay thing to do. Already, a lot of our college students think it's legalized in Columbia. That they come in here thinking that, even though they can get arrested, and get a ticket or whatever, they really view it as society is saying it's okay. And there's certainly what's happening in this country is giving them that impression, and then what happens in this town is going to give them that impression. So there are going to be more people using it, which means more people could actually get in trouble because there are more people using it. And the fact that more people are using it, those are the same students that are going to go out looking for jobs, and they're going to have marijuana in their system, and they're much more likely to not get that job because marijuana is in their system than the small number of people who are going to actually get arrested and kept on the record. So I am, probably not shocking, opposed to this ordinance for multiple reasons. One is it clearly is a problem for the police, and the police are pretty clearly saying it can't be enforced. So that alone should be enough, in my opinion. But if you add to that increase in use and increase in problems because of that use, because there are also a lot of other issues like short-term memory loss and all these kinds of things that are going to hurt students' ability to be successful academically.
I disagree with just about everything you say.
I know.
I would say, you know, we're talking process and all this. We've got these folks here past their dinner time and all. I think we ought to concentrate. Any more questions for them? Otherwise,
I do have one.
Here, so.
I do have one. Thank you for that. I do have a question.
I just don't want to be here, guys.
And then maybe a discussion among board members for our next meeting, but that for the chairs of because of the quantities we've talked about with each individual having allowed to cultivate up to 6 slots at a time, what potential do you think that could what do you think is the potential for that for distribution, for adding to the problem that some board members have talked about for growing for the purpose of sale?
Want to go first?
Well, I don't know, without putting it into practice and actually dealing with it for a while, I'm not sure I could give you a really good answer to it. I would agree with Kim 100%. You know, there was a study out there to add to what she was saying, that over the last decade, the last 10 years, Columbia University did a study with traffic accidents, fatality, traffic accident, fatal, and 12% of that 24,000 were using marijuana, or had marijuana in their system, had THC in their system.
Sometime in the last 2 weeks. Is what
that doesn't say that it's the cause of it. It could be a drunk driver that had it in his system from use weeks ago, right?
Yes.
I think that study was referring to impaired driving, non-alcohol impaired driving.
Right.
Yeah, the Colorado study,
Well,
14% increase.
It could impact.
So back to the question of distribution though, if I can produce this much marijuana and I can't consume it, one of our speakers made the comment that you'd be stoned a lot if you were consuming. So I just sell it to my fraternity, and I don't sell. I just sell you one. What do I say?
One joint.
Not here.
Now all of a sudden I'm a distributor.
This ordinance doesn't address distribution.
So doing so with what I've grown is still the same felony that it is if I'm.
If I sell you a joint, it's a felony. If I sell you a pound, it's a felony. Okay.
Or if I give it,
You
I can't
give
do
it.
it.
If I
You don't
give
have
it,
to sell it.
exactly.
Well, that's what
Yeah.
we're doing, yeah.
It's a distribution.
This is another unintended negative consequence that worries me in terms of our students particularly.
Yeah, I think
Not
there's
knowing what
no
they're doing.
question there would be some fallout of, you know, hey, Joey goes over to Jimmy's house and there's 6 marijuana plants. Joey certainly doesn't have a medical recommendation for the use of marijuana, and Jimmy and Joey hang around, get high on the 6 plants that are growing in Jimmy's house. Unintended consequences, there are going to be many, and probably too numerous to even try and list until it's actually seen.
What if this, what if we, I'm hung up on the volume of 6 plants, and I'm totally hung up on this. And so what if we said 3 plants, or 1 plant, or
change state law. None of it's legal.
Right.
One plant this tall is illegal, and it's a felony. So that's almost new. You know, what Sergeant Shea was addressing, he was giving conservative quantities. You know, with all due respect, if the limit's going to be 6 plants or 4 plants or 3 or whatever it is, you know, I understand the gentleman said that, you know, most folks may not use that. I'm sorry, that's not true. People are going to grow as much as they possibly can according to what they're allowed to.
If they're doing it for criminal purposes.
For criminal purposes, for ordinance purposes, if the law says I can grow 6 plants, I'm not going to grow 2. I'm going to grow 6.
I have a question too. I'm sorry. I don't understand city ordinance and stuff like that. I don't get it. How can you have a city ordinance that says you can grow it when under the state it's illegal to grow? The ordinance should be scrapped. It's against the law.
That's why I think the purpose of this is really more symbolic than anything else. I'm not sure anyone that puts this together really terribly seriously. It's more just going to move.
Well, someone's going to take it seriously. Obviously, people take it seriously.
I have a
Government and local
question.
All right, let's
I
go
agree
on
with
one
you,
of these
but I'm just saying
questions. And then I think we do need to wrap things up.
I agree.
Yeah.
I don't want to prolong this into too long, but I've heard it strongly asserted that any move toward lowering the penalties results in greater use. And so my question is there any reliable data that shows that marijuana use in Colombia has escalated more than marijuana use elsewhere since the existing?
I have University of Missouri compared to 20 other campuses in Missouri.
But didn't we say we have to self-report for that to be data? I mean,
Well,
how many kids are going to say, I have an eye all the time?
That wasn't
they
my
do say
question.
it.
My question was, is there longitudinal data that shows increase
Yes,
more so in Colombia than
yes, I can provide that.
reliable?
Yeah, this is reliable data. Yes.
Well, I would appreciate seeing that.
Okay, so, all right, so we've got one more meeting coming up, and we can all go home now and ponder things for a month and come back, and then we can hash this out. Oh, never mind. And we can, I said to myself, I am going to make sure that I don't do that, but I did. So we can go home, think about all this, get whatever other information we think would be helpful. I'm sure maybe some people in the audience might be able to send us additional things based upon today's discussion. Come back, and then in July, at our July meeting, try to formulate what our plan is. And my suggestion would be, because I think, in my mind, the first thing we have to decide is there going to be a combined report between the commission and the Board of Health. Or are we going to do ours, and you guys are going to do yours? If we decide on a combined report, then I think we ought to just maybe take a series of polls among the members about, how we proceed. Because there's way too many of us for Chris or I to make that decision. And I think, if the majority says that we ought to say yes, then we move to yes. If the majority says we ought to say, there can always be a minority opinion. And if the majority says no, and if the majority says, I think we ought to send them suggestions on how to improve it, we do that. If the majority says we shouldn't, then we don't. And I think we just discuss all that at our next meeting. Then we go back and we write a report. And then maybe Chris and I write a report based upon what you all decided, and then we circulate it amongst ourselves. We can't have, unless we have another meeting, we can't really get into a discussion, or we shouldn't, at least with the sunshine. But what we could do is meet again, or we just send the report out, let everybody send back their suggestions. Chris and I finalize it, and it goes off. That is, if we have a joint report. Yes, Eric. Gene,
Yeah.
here.
Because it really appears that if we have to give it by the August deadline, and I'm not sure when what August.
Early August, first meeting, August 4th or something.
From my perspective, I don't think we're going to be able to polish this off in one meeting.
I think we can.
I would really suggest that we meet before next month to decide whether it's a joint report or each does it separately. And because it will take some time to write up the recommendations. So I would really propose that if we have to get it done by early August, that we meet before mid-July to at least determine how we're going to deal with it. Joint report, what issues we really want to address within recommendations. And then you'll have about, maybe 2-3 weeks after that, right, and get feedback and revise what a joint or individual reports will be.
Maybe I'm the one that's thought this, but we're the Board of Health, and we're talking about allowing people to smoke, or even encouraging them to smoke. And we've had a lot of trouble to make a smoking ban in the city, and, we're talking about smoking. They were actually that word dozens of times all evening when we're the Board of Health.
Right.
Well, you get into the candy part, but I guess Marine Dow showed that you gotta be real careful.
Brownie is fine.
All right, so I guess Gary has made a proposal that we add an extra meeting. Let's discuss that and come to a conclusion on whether or not we think we should or we shouldn't. I'd like to hear.
What's the plus? I want to know the pluses and the minuses of a joint report or 2 separate reports.
You could do it like the Supreme Court does too. You concur with the opinion, but have your own little,
Right.
I mean, were we cast together to do the same thing?
No. Yeah, it was sent to both the commission and the Board of Health. We are 2 different entities, so we can do it any way you want to. It's just that.
Well, I think we can address Harry's thing now. I mean, either we do it together or we don't.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I think it should be separate. That's my opinion.
I think so too.
All right, so let's take a vote. How many people want a joint report? Well, let's start. How many want?
I'll use the word joint.
How many want a combined report? Okay. How many want individual reports? Okay, so fine, that's settled.
Well, do we need to meet again?
So then do we need to meet again together, or should we meet with our meeting in August or in July and you guys meet with yours? Okay. How many people on the board now will be to your side? How many for the Board of Health think we can't wrap this up at the July meeting, discuss yes and no, yes, no, yes, no, no, yes, and then write a report?
I have a question,
Yeah.
before I can make a decision on that. How much of this can we do on email or something? I mean, what about?
We can't. So again, what I said my thought would be is that what I would do is I would go and have a meeting, and then we would go through a series of questions. The first question would be, is this a yes or is this a no? Because if it's a yes, then it's a different report than if it's a no. And we would decide. And if we say yes, that's what we want to do. Then my next question would be, does the board want to give suggestions to the council? Say yes, but here are suggestions. Vice versa, if we say no, then I would say, does the board want to give suggestions? And if we say no, we don't want to give any suggestions, we just want to know, then I'll tell you, we don't need another meeting to review that report, because it's going to be pretty darn easy. Now, if you guys say yes, we want to make lots of suggestions to make a better ordinance to allow people to be able to grow plants, then we'd go through each one of those suggestions and say, what do we want to suggest to the council? We would discuss it. I don't know that there's a lot of suggestions we would make. And then once we've got all that, we write it down. I go write a report, but I would probably do it with Maurice so that there's 2 of us doing it. And then we would write the report and send it out to you all. And then you could give comments. But it's going to be exactly what you voted on in the meeting. That's why I'm not thinking we need extra meetings. But I'm happy to do it.
And in the time preceding the meeting, can we email you thoughts towards the report?
Well, the report won't be written until after the next.
Right, but I mean, we can sort of put some thoughts out there that,
Sure.
Just make sure that
you would send it to Stephanie.
If you want it to everybody, please don't email to everybody.
Yeah, no, you would email it to Stephanie, and then she would send it out now. We would be split it, and case would only go to the Board of Health then. And you can say, well, you know, I was thinking about it, this and that, so that we're all mulling it over to the fullest mulling extent we can.
But if we
And then
want,
we come together.
comments to go to everybody, if we go through
Sounds
you,
good.
that's fine.
And then I will save it for
Yeah.
the whole world.
Yeah, it would go in the book, and so
Yeah.
that it's in the Board of Health book there for comments. So I think let's talk now, let's focus on whether or not we want to have a meeting in 2 weeks, or we want to wait till our next meeting.
If we're going to do an individual report, and if we follow what we're saying now, we will send through Stephanie some questions, some comments, whatnot, before the next meeting. And then, as you say, next meeting, and then work afterwards. We can polish it off, and that'd be fine.
You're okay with that?
And-
Everybody okay with that? Okay, good.
Now, I was just going to ask, as far as him being our staff liaison, Mr. Hollis, do you have any additional direction? Are we off base here as far as where we were supposed to head with this?
Well, just a quick point of order. I might suggest you let your guests go if you're going to.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I do have one question. One question of the officers. You know, kids use marijuana, even more or less, and alcohol, but they also, especially when they're young, and some others use cocaine, meth, psilocybin mushrooms, hallucinogens. Would you agree that they get those through drug dealers who are in the business of... And maybe that drug dealer specializes in marijuana, but that drug dealer gets their marijuana. Aren't the dynamics of the trade such that they go up the line? That's the person you go through to go on up the line to get those harder drugs.
Or they produce them themselves. I mean, particularly with the methamphetamine problem.
Well, man, that's kind of new because,
you know.
You know, most of the time when you get the kids or whoever doing that, they won't give up where they got it from. You know, it's like pulling heel feet. You can't get that out of them. So
you don't know where it comes
I can speculate, but I don't know for sure.
All right, so let's, if you guys want, now if you want to stay and listen, because I know it's past, but you can stay, but if you want to leave, go right ahead. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Your information
That was really
very
helpful.
helpful.
Good, how are you? Sorry, how are you doing? Hey, Greg.
No, Steve. Thank you, Steve.
Nice to meet you.
Hey, how are you?
Well, I make a motion for our committee to get one.
Well, yeah, I think we already decided.
Oh, good. I missed it. Sure.
Through consensus.
We'll meet in July, I reckon.
Okay. We'll send you a revised calendar.
Thank you. So I just want to say that it was a pleasure to work with you guys. And, you're welcome back anytime you have an issue that you have an interest in. You come out with us.
It's our pleasure. Thank you very much.
So now.
I'm sure.